Hey guys, how's everyone doing? This is Sir Jedi Sentinel, and welcome back to Sentinel Reviews. Doing something a little different today, I will be doing my first Classic Who review. So if you haven't seen the title, today we are looking at Doctor Who, Mark of the Rani. Written by Pip and Jane Baker, directed by Sarah Hellings. Mark of the Rani stars Colin Baker as the Sixth Doctor, Nicola Bryant as Perry Brown, Anthony Ainley as the Master, and Kate O'Mara as the Rani. As always, I am putting a blanket spoiler warning in place, just in case I do decide to talk about spoilers. If you have not seen The Mark of the Rani, it is available to stream on BBC iPlayer in the UK and on Tubi, at least in the US. I don't know where it's streaming internationally. Before I begin the review proper, there is something I have to say. I put out a short talking about this, but if you didn't see that, I'm going to reiterate it here. Because this is going in the place of something, because this video is going in the place of something else. Normally, since I've started reviewing episodes of Doctor Who on my channel, when a season would end, the final video in my review series would be a season ranking the episodes of the season from worst to best. This time around, I am going to be skipping that because the Shooty era ended abruptly. So, like with the Whittaker era, once that ended, one thing I did was I did a top 10 ranking of my favorite episodes for Jodie Whittaker across the entire era. Which means now that the Ncuti Gatwa era is over, it's Ncuti's turn. Only because his run was so short, 16 episodes, if you count both his two-parters as one episode, which I am in this case, I am going to rank every episode. So the reason I am skipping the Series 15 ranking is to not be redundant when I do a ranking of his entire era. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, let's get into this Mark of the Rani. Look at the caption of this video. TV Who's only good Rani story. Take a wild guess why I'm reviewing this. So anyway, like I said, several ways I wanted to open this. And right in the middle of speaking, I didn't know which one I wanted to do. Mark of the Rani is the third story of Colin Baker's first season as the Sixth Doctor, season 22. Like I said, it was written by Pip and Jane Baker, and I honestly think it is their best story. Pip and Jane Baker, in their time on Doctor Who, wrote 3.5 stories. That half story has extenuating circumstances. They wrote Mark of the Rani in Colin's first season, and they created the character of the Rani. They wrote Terror of the Vervoids in Colin's second season, Trial of a Time Lord, and they wrote the second half of the finale story of Trial of a Time Lord, The Ultimate Foe. And then their final contribution to Doctor Who on TV, I don't know if they did any expanded universe work, but their final contribution to Doctor Who on TV was Sylvester McCoy's first story, Time and the Rani. I am not the biggest fan of Pip and Jane Baker. In fact, outside of this story, I actually do not like their work at all. One of their big problems is that, nothing against them for it, just they were so enthusiastic about new advances in science and technology that they wanted to incorporate them into the stories they wrote. This is most prominent in The Ultimate Foe. That's where the whole megabyte modem stuff came from. And unfortunately, this has the side effect of severely dating the stories they wrote. Like, their stories lack the timelessness that might make audiences in a modern context enjoy watching Doctor Who. Their stories are usually severely dated. Also, I was talking with one of my friends about this at one point. This was a while ago now. And I brought up my take that Mark of the Rani is Pip and Jane Baker's best story. Because, again, I do think it is. And he said he theorized it's because Mark of the Rani is the only story that had a script editor. So a little behind the scenes context for this. In New Who, what we would call the showrunner in Classic Who was two jobs. It was the executive producer and the script editor. So like some famous duo, because again, in New Who, the showrunner does both duties that the executive producer and the script editor both used to do. There are still, in New Who, there are still executive producer and script editor positions, but they don't have the same power or control over the show that they did in Classic Who, which is where the showrunner comparison comes in. Famous showrunner, famous executive producer, script editor pairings include Philip Hinchcliffe and Robert Holmes, Graham Williams, was it Graham Williams or Graham Harper, and Douglas Adams, and John Nathan Turner and Eric Sayward. So this was under the time. Mark of the Rani came out when the executive producer and script editor were John Nathan Turner and Eric Sayward. And then for their next season, Trial of a Time Lord, the working relationship between Nathan Turner and Sayward had completely deteriorated, and Sayward unceremoniously left the show. So, during Terror of the Vervoids, I don't know at what point in production Sayward left, there was basically no script editor to refine and edit the stories, and then there were extenuating circumstances to the second episode of The Ultimate Foe that we are not getting into. And then with the Sylvester McCoy era, when the script editor was Andrew Cartmel, Pip and Jane Baker basically had no respect for him and steamrolled over anything he tried to do with their story. So yeah, Mark of the Rani is the only story of Pip and Jane Baker's that really had a script editor. It's interesting too, talking about it, because if you don't know, I'm going with the assumption that most of my viewers are more familiar with New Who than Classic Who. Not everyone, of course, but just for the benefit of those viewers. If you don't know, the Sixth Doctor era, Colin Baker's era, kind of has a reputation as one of the worst eras of the show. A take I vehemently disagree with. Take your shot. Colin Baker is my favorite Doctor. But every so often on social media and people talking about it, it seems, the Colin Baker era goes through this renaissance where people go, oh, hey, it's actually not so bad, to, oh, hey, it's actually quite good. And even in those times, people will still say, but Mark of the Rani is still a bad story. And I am actually quite a defender of it, as you're going to see in this review. I do enjoy this story. Is it perfect? No, it does have some issues. For example, it has the same issue that, every story in Colin's first season has. Season 22, my favorite season of Classic Who. There are pacing issues, because these are 45-minute episodes. Again, a little bit more history here. So Classic Who, if you're unfamiliar, used to be serialized. In Modern Who, in New Who, episodes range from 45 to 50 minutes with some deviation, and they're usually single episodes. In Classic Who, they were serialized. Episodes were 20 minutes, but stories would be multiple parts, and a story would be however many episodes it would be. So they would commonly range anywhere from 2 episodes to 6 episodes, with very little deviation beyond that. Like, there was one 8-episode story, there was one 10-episode story, there was one 12-episode story, and there was one 14-episode story. But 2 to 6 was usually where you were about going to be, with 4 episodes being the most common. Now, during the previous season, season 21, Peter Davison's final season, there was some kind of sporting event, I don't remember what it was exactly, that conflicted with the airing of one of his stories. I just blanked on the name. Resurrection of the Daleks, sorry. So many R-word of the Daleks. Anyway, Resurrection of the Daleks. So, Resurrection of the Daleks had to be re-edited from 4 25-minute episodes into 2 45-minute episodes. And the ratings for Resurrection of the Daleks were so big that the producers of the show decided, okay, for this next season, for Colin's season, all the episodes are going to be 45 minutes. Every story is going to be 45-minute episodes. And it's very obvious that, you would think just, hey, write two 25-minute episode scripts and smash them together, but it's very obvious that with the exception of Robert Holmes, none of the writers for Colin's first season knew how to write. Oh, and Eric Sayward, because he did write Resurrection of the Daleks. None of the writers for Colin's first season really knew how to write 45-minute episodes. So, again, it just brings down the pacing because they are just full of tedious padding, including my other big criticism of this story. One of the goofiest sequences in this entire story. So there is a point where, in an effort to escape the Doctor, the Rani and the Master set a trap for him, and the Rani lays down one of her inventions. Landmines that turn people into trees. And just in execution, even on paper, if I'm being honest, this is goofy. It is unintentionally hilarious. And you can tell just by watching the episode, it's like, we're not quite at 45 minutes. We need something to pad the runtime. And it's this entire tree mine sequence. It only exists to pad the runtime. Like, because you can cut it pretty much completely and lose nothing. So those are really my biggest issues with this story. I have one other that I'm going to talk about in terms of performances, but it's not specific to this story. So, what is the story here? Well, the Doctor and Perry find themselves in... Well, they never really give a specific time period. They're very vague on that. But in England during the Industrial Revolution, in fact, the Doctor makes a big deal of wanting to meet George Stephenson, the man who invented the steam engine. But of course, in England at the time of the Industrial Revolution, there was also the Luddite Rebellion, when various workers, miners, etc., thought the Industrial Revolution was going to cost them their jobs. So they would violently oppose, these inventions. They would try to wreck them. I don't know much about the Luddite Rebellion, so I'm going very, very broad strokes here. And the Master has followed the Doctor here, and he sees an opportunity to use the Luddite Rebellion to, finally eliminate the Doctor once and for all, especially when he learns another colleague of the Doctor and the Master, of himself and the Doctor, the Rani, a Time Lord known as the Rani, is here as well. So this is actually I think in hindsight, this is actually one of Colin's softer episodes. So, again, one of the conceits behind the Sixth Doctor era is they kind of wanted to rehash the first Doctor's arc a little bit. They wanted a Doctor who would start off very acerbic, very brusque, very rough, but over time, as he adventured and bonded with his companion, he would soften up. For a lot of people in the execution, Colin was too brutal. He was too acerbic. People found him much more on the harsh or even outright mean side, and they took a problem with that, which I think led to the massive course correction in Trial of a Time Lord. But yeah, watching this story again, I think this is one of the Sixth Doctor's softer episodes. He is not so harsh. He is not so standoffish, probably in part because he is fanboying over the idea of meeting George Stephenson. In a similar regard, again, watching it in hindsight, this is also one of Perry's better episodes. Again, if you've seen my companion rankings, Perry is a companion I love. She is one of my favorite companions of all time. But, an opinion the fandom does not share. And again, it goes back to her creation. It is famously noted that Perry was a companion created, quote unquote, for the dads. And so she is very male-gazy, and probably more often than any other companion, except maybe Susan or even Victoria, or even Sarah Jane when she traveled with the Fourth Doctor, hot take, Perry gets damseled a lot. But again, just, given how Perry is treated in the TV show overall and what the fandom tends to think of her, this is one of her better roles, one of her better stories. She is given a lot of agency. She's given stuff to do. It doesn't pan out, but she's given far more to do here than she normally has. The Master, Anthony Ainley. This was the other thing I was talking about. This is one of Ainley's weaker episodes, and I'm not a fan of the Anthony Ainley Master. I'm sorry, so that's saying something. Apologies, but let me explain. So when Anthony Ainley took over for the Master, he was the last Master of Classic Who. He appeared from Tom Baker's final season all the way to the end of the show. He is primarily seen as his main adversary is primarily the Fifth Doctor, probably more by quantity than anything else, because from Tom Baker's final season to Colin Baker's final season, so that's 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and then after a little hiatus, he shows up one more time in Sylvester McCoy's final season. That's 7 seasons in total. He makes at least 1 appearance a season. Sometimes more. Notably, in Peter Davison's first season, he makes 2 appearances. But yeah, he will make a minimum of 1 appearance a season. And this is such a problem. On top of how the show treated the Ainley Master. If you don't know this story. Anthony Ainley wanted to be a suave, charming, charismatic yet dark Master. He essentially wanted to be Roger Delgado 2.0. He wanted the Master to be a Bond villain. But the show and the scripts essentially told him, no, you are a Saturday morning cartoon villain. And that, along with Ainley's repeated appearances, really diminished this Master in my eyes. Again, no fault to Ainley. He is playing his heart. He is playing everything. He is milking everything he can out of the role. It's just the way the show treated him. On top of his numerous repeat appearances, it just really diminished this Master. It really diminished him from being a viable threat. I'm not scared of this one like I am of Derek Jacobi or Jeffrey Beavers or... Well, I was never scared of Delgado, but even he had his intense moments that Ainley just really lacks. Again, on top of the way the show treated him outside of his first and last stories, and just his numerous appearances, it really did him no favors. I think in part that's why the show created the Rani, because they realized the Master was wearing thin. This is speculation, by the way. They realized the Master was wearing thin, so they wanted to create a new Time Lord villain to take his place. And that really brings us to the Rani, Kato Mara, who is the best part of this story and is giving the best performance in the serial. So I talked about this before. Anytime we talk about the Rani, we always talk about what she is on paper, what she is conceptually. She is essentially a take on the mad scientist archetype. She relentlessly pursues her experiments for whatever results they will yield. She is completely amoral. Any ethics there are to be had in the scientific approach, she does not utilize them. She only cares about the results. So if her experiments traumatize her subjects, she doesn't care as long as she gets results. And we always bring up what the Rani is conceptually, because in execution, the execution is what lets her down. I said this in my review in Wish World, that despite what this character is conceptually, in execution, she is written to be the Master. And this is a problem that started way back in Classic Who, honestly, with her second ever appearance, Time and the Rani. She is the Master in that story. And it's something New Who would continue to do with Dimensions and Time, with Wish World and the Reality War. Again, in the expanded universe, she is handled much better. In fact, Siobhan Redmond at Big Finish is my favorite Rani for this reason, because she is the character they wanted conceptually. And she's really good in this story too. Like, I kind of didn't realize it, but upon rewatching it to review this, she is actually really good in this story. So again, some backstory for the Rani here that is given to us in exposition. When the Time Lords discovered the Rani's experiments, they exiled her to a planet called Myasymia Goria, which she took over and began experimenting on the people of that planet. And her experiment warped the people's brain chemistry so much they could no longer sleep. And, prolonged absence of sleep left them irritable and much more prone to violent acts. So, that's why she came to Earth during the Luddite Rebellion. Because in the entire universe, the only other place that engineers the chemical people need to sleep is the human brain. So she came here during the Luddite Rebellion to steal that chemical. And this shows how smart the Rani actually is and really commits to the character. Because whereas the Master would have some sort of megalomaniacal scheme with dreams of conquest, or the monk, who is more of a trickster figure, or sees that, hey, if things went this way, if the outcome was different, maybe things would be better. The Rani is playing this very smart. As she mentions, she had been through several periods in Earth's history where there was unrest. The Luddite Rebellion in this story, the American Revolution, the fall of Rome, all of these, other great periods of revolution and unrest and upheaval. And she targets the people who are responsible for some of those violent acts. So, she's not trying to incite anything. She is covering her tracks. She is very meticulous in how she has planned this. And similarly, too, the Master spends most of the story trying to get the Rani on his side. He's like, let's work together and take over the world and the universe, and let's get rid of the Doctor. And the Rani wants nothing to do with him. She's like, I'm doing an experiment. I need this for this experiment. Please leave me alone. And it basically takes the Master about 80% of this story before the Rani finally sides with him. It's like, he spends all story trying to convince her to work with him and kill the Doctor. And she keeps going, I want nothing to do with you. And finally, towards the climax of the story, she finally agrees. And it's not said explicitly in the dialogue, but it is implied in the performance. It's not like, oh, you have a good idea, yeah, let's work together. Their partnership is more of a, if I work with you, will you please shut up? So that's a really fun aspect. I do think the fact that the Master is in this story prevents that problem that would happen with the Rani later, but it really sets up how different of a character the Rani is to both the Doctor and the Master. Let's be honest. Beyond that, everything else is fine. Again, we're set in the Luddite Rebellion. George Stevenson is a minor character here. The only other side character who gets any kind of prominent screen time is Lord Ravensworth, and he's fun. There's nothing really major to him. He's just that stiff upper lip British aristocrat, but the way he and the Doctor and Perry bond over their love of science and things, and just over this adventure is enjoyable. He is probably the other notable standout character in this. But yeah, I have nothing else to say. Mark of the Rani is just, honestly, I think it's an underrated story. It's a story I will continue to defend, and it is TV Who's best Rani story. But those are my thoughts. Have you seen Mark of the Rani? What are yours? Start a conversation in the comments below, and remember to like, comment, subscribe. Click the bell next to subscribe to get notifications when I upload, and in the description box below, you'll find the link to my Bluesky where you can follow me and get updates on the channel. This is Sir Jedi Sentinel, and I'll see you guys next time.